Okay, this is on radical equations and inequalities, and I'm just going to do this by an example. In the directions, it will just say solve. Okay, you're solving for x. Okay, and let's say they give you x equals the square root of x plus 7. Now, that's all underneath the radical. Don't just write it like this, because it makes a difference. It's all underneath the radical, so extend that radical symbol all the way out, and then plus 5. Okay. On any of these, whether it's a square root, cube root, fifth root, whatever, okay, you want to isolate this radical. You want to get this radical by itself. Okay. So first thing you'd want to do is subtract 5 on both sides. Now, if you need to write that down, that step, go ahead and write it down. If you don't need to write it down and you know that if I subtract it over, I'm going to have x minus 5 equals. So that's up to you whether or not you write this step down. Some of you are past that and don't need to write it down. So you're at x minus 5 equals the square root of x plus 7. Now, the whole thing of this is, and star it, isolate the radical. Now I'm going to say plural there. In this problem we only have one. But if I had more than one, I would have to isolate them one at a time. You get one radical by itself, okay, and then get the other one by itself, okay? So on this one, it's a square root. So to get rid of that square root, you have to square both sides. Use parentheses or brackets or braces that show that you're squaring both sides. Now, here's the common error. When you square a binomial, you should always get a trinomial square. If you don't know what that answer is by the shortcut, then you can write it out twice. Do that outside. You can use the FOIL, first, outer, inner, last. You can use the arrows, multiply it out. If you can tell by sight what this is going to be, that's great. Okay. This would be x squared and then minus 5x and then minus 5x and then plus 25. In combined like terms, you'd have x squared minus 10x plus 25. Now, here's the shortcut. Okay, the shortcut is you square this first term. So square the first term would be x squared. You multiply these two together, would be a negative 5x, and then you double it, would be a negative 10x. And then you square the last term, would be plus 25. Okay? So anytime you square a binomial, you ought to get 3 terms, you ought to get a trinomial squared. Then all it's going to do on this side is it's going to get rid of that radical. And you're down to that. Okay? Okay? Then you need to get it in standard form equal to 0. Okay? And you may want to put that down as a note. Standard form, you're getting it in standard form equal to 0. That's the next step. Okay? So basically I'm subtracting an x, I'm subtracting a 7. If you're at that stage where you can do it by sight, I'm fine with that. If not, you would, and I try to keep this x squared term positive because most of you are used to factoring with a positive x squared. So if it's already positive, I would leave it on that side. Okay? And if you want to do these on the same step, that's fine. Okay, so I'd end up with x squared minus 11x, okay, plus 18 equals 0. Okay. Now, from that stage, it's a quadratic. I always try factoring and then quadratic formula. I don't do completing the square unless you have to. I would do quadratic formula. But is this one factorable? Yep. You know you need an x and an x. This sign right here, when you multiply these last things together, has to be positive. So that tells you the signs are alike. Okay, this tells you what they definitely both are. They're both negative. Two numbers that multiply together to give you 18, and they add together to give you 11. Okay, if that's a If this is a plus sign, they add together to give you 11. So 9 and 2, okay? You get it factored, okay? And then set each one of those equal 0. And then x equals 9 if you add 9 to both sides, and x equals 2. Now, this, anytime you have radical equations, you introduce what they call extraneous roots. Have you heard that term before? Or is that new? Last year. Okay, extraneous roots. What those are, they are roots. They are roots to this equation, but not roots to the original. Okay, so, and this is a great ACT type question. Okay, because they're going to have choices. A would be 9 and 2, B would be 9, C would be 2, and D would be none of the above. Okay, so what they're saying is check your answers. Okay, so sub 9 back in there. If you go back to the original, and I don't care if you write it out, but you better at least do a check. Okay, if you put 9 back in, okay, you'd get 9 equals the square root of 16 plus 5. And they're considering the principal nth root. They're considering the positive 4. So 4 plus 5, yeah, that checks. Okay, so 9's okay. Now check 2. Okay, so put 2 back into the original. And you get 2 equals the square root of 2 plus 7. And you should be able to tell already that's not going to work. Okay, because you'd end up with 2 equals 3 plus 5. No. Okay, so this one you reject. So the only answer on this one is 9. Now star it, highlight it, something that says check your answers. When you're doing that, when you're doing the square root on the check, yeah. Like don't do, like I'm not doing square root of 16 is negative 4. You just do the principal nth root. But you have to check both answers, and it's check it all the way back up into the original. Okay? Because extraneous roots, if I check my answer, if I check both answers back in this, they're both going to work. Okay? You've got to check them back in the original. There will be answers that you will reject. Okay? Now, if they have a problem with more than one radical, you've got to isolate one radical at a time. Okay? And if I did, let's say I did something like this, just as an example. Okay? One of those is isolated already. Okay? I'm just making up a problem. I'm not going to solve this all the way. But if I squared both sides, okay, I got to get rid of that radical. Okay, so I'm squaring both sides. It gets rid of this one. Okay, now how do you square this? Okay, if you don't know how to square it, you're going to have to write it out the long way. I'll take you through the long way and the shortcut. If I square this, I'm going to write it out twice. Okay, so I multiply this out. When I multiply just radical x minus 3 times radical x minus 3, it's just going to get rid of the radical. So just be x minus 3. When I multiply this out, it's going to be positive 7 radical x minus 3. You always put the coefficient in front. Now I multiply this, it'd be positive 7 radical x minus 3. And then the last would be 49. Now when you add this to this, okay, you add the numbers in front, okay, so I've got x minus 3 plus 14 radical x minus 3, okay, it's just like saying 5x plus 5x would be 10x. You add the numbers in front, okay, and then you'd go ahead and simplify. Now you can simplify this, you combine, okay, and I'd end up with x plus 14 radical x minus 3 and plus 46. right? Okay. Okay, now, if I did it by the shortcut, okay, if I just go in and square a binomial, okay, shortcut would be square the first term. So if you square that, you just get rid of the radical. Okay? Then you multiply these two together, so it'd be 7 radical x minus 3, and double it. So that'd be 14 radical x minus 3. And then square the last one, would be 49. And then you got to go through and combine my terms. So you decide, do you need to write it out to square it, or do you need the shortcut? Can you do the shortcut? Okay? But anytime you square a binomial, you better end up with a trinomial square. This is a trinomial square. Okay? It might not look like it, but it is. Okay? Okay. I'm going to give you time on those problems. There are like 6 problems on 4-7, and then you need to begin your review and make sure you're caught up on everything up through this test. Okay? Remember, we've only had 1 test so far, and you're probably going to have maybe 3 this 9 weeks. So this test is like a third of your overall grade. Definitely worth your study time. Okay? Okay?